Hello, Foster. It's great to have you. You are the Principal Economics Officer at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning in Ghana. So welcome. Thanks for joining. Then we have Sebastian Lesch as the representative of the G7. Sebastian is the head of the Climate Policy Division at the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. Welcome, Sebastian. We also have Sara Ahmed. She's the V20 Global Lead and Finance Advisor representing the Vulnerable 20 group. Thank you, Sara, for joining. And last but not least, we have Vositha Wijenayake. She's the Executive Director of the SLYCAN Trust, and she will be providing the civil society perspective on this topic. So before we move into the discussion, I'd just like to share some background on where we're coming from and why we think having this discussion is important. So we all know that climate change intensifies extreme weather events and is also leading to slow onset losses such as sea level rise and other risks. And so while we have to keep our collective efforts and our attention on mitigating greenhouse gases and adapting to climate change, even with those efforts reaching the needed scale, we know that climate change will lead to more losses and damages, and those will particularly affect vulnerable countries in the global south and poor and vulnerable countries within those countries. And so given that developing countries have been pushing for financial support in dealing with these losses and damages as part of the annual climate negotiations under the UNFCCC. Last year, there was a landmark decision at COP27, which was reached to establish new funding arrangements and a dedicated fund which would assist developing countries in responding to loss and damage. And there is a transitional committee which was set up and has met many times over this year to make recommendations on how to operationalize the fund and the funding arrangements by COP28. And this transitional committee, after almost a year of negotiations, has agreed that the Loss and Damage Fund will be hosted at the World Bank as a financial intermediary fund for an interim period of 4 years. With that, we are going into an exciting COP, which will, among other topics, look at how to further operationalize the fund. And in parallel to that, over the last decades, we've seen a strong increase of innovative solutions, prearranged financing solutions to address these risks. So money that is prearranged in advance, arrangements that are prearranged and can disperse funds quickly and reliably when disasters occur, starting with a variety of different implementing programs and ultimately culminating in the launch of the V20 G7 Global Shield, also in last year's COP, which has the objective to increase the financial protection of vulnerable people by providing more and better prearranged financing solutions. And so obviously there is a link between the Global Shield and there is a contribution that the Global Shield can do, can provide to address losses and damages. And today's event focuses on looking at these linkages and sharing various perspectives on how to further strengthen these linkages so that the Global Shield and prearranged finance can make a sustained commitment to addressing loss and damage. So with that said, I would like to start today's discussion with Sara. Sara, you've been involved in the development of the Global Shield from the outset. So maybe you can give us an overview of the V20 perspective on the Global Shield, explaining the Global Shield's initiative, but also sharing some of the key learnings that we've made after 1 year of setting up the Global Shield. So over to you, Sara.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. So I'll quickly share a presentation. So greetings, everyone. I'm calling from Accra in Ghana. And I'll just do a quick introduction on the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the V20. So if we move to the next slide. The Climate Vulnerable Forum, the CVF, is an international partnership of countries highly vulnerable to a warming planet. The forum serves as a South-South cooperation platform for participating governments to work together to deal with global climate change. And the V20 Finance Ministers Group was founded in 2015 under the CVF presidency of the Philippines, just 2 months before the Paris Agreement, to translate political ambition into investment and transformation in the real economy. So from 20 members in 2015, the membership now spans 68 members, representing 1.74 billion people. And at the same time, in the last 2 decades, the V20 has lost over $500 billion. In other words, its people, its economies would be 20% wealthier if not for climate change. So as disasters strike, countries are forced to borrow to replace the bridge, the road damage, homes lost, replace income for those whose jobs were lost or disrupted. The debt crisis is underway, and it is clearly perpetuated by climate chaos. And so it's critical to transform economies this decade. And with that, the resources to come with it as well. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just share some policy objectives quickly of the V20. So the V20's work is focused on the delivery of climate finance, especially from the multilateral system, to leverage private sector for the realization of climate prosperity in member states towards development positive climate action through adaptation and a modernized power system that maximizes renewable energy wealth. It also includes increased financial protection and resources to address loss and damage, given growing climate-fueled risks, and unlocking the potential of carbon financing to accelerate investment. And recalling that lasting climate solutions clearly require considerable comprehensive reforms in the international financial architecture, the V20 has called for an immediate alignment with climate science through their Accra Marrakesh agenda. And here, I think what's most reflective of the Global Shield is point 4 on revolutionizing risk management for our economy, because through the Global Shield, one can get access to prearranged and trigger-based funds, which then makes it easier in a way to risk manage. If we go to the next slide. Climate and disaster risk financing not only includes financial planning and risk management, but it also integrates adaptation. So these are very complementary efforts. So when disasters strike, liquidity is critical to protect people and the infrastructure and economy they depend on, so that it can quickly be replaced or recovered. Timing as well is equally critical, because delayed access to resources means that it'll mean that the economy and its people will face compounding losses. And if we go to the next slide, this shows that the toolkit is quite vast, and it's clear that no one tool will be enough in isolation. But when used as a portfolio of tools, then they become more effective. So along with the toolkit in the Global Shield, there's also technical acceleration support, with getting complementary support from early warning systems. Also important that we improve social protection systems, risk analytics, and build the case for adaptation. It's clear that the plethora of instruments and different institutions involved does make the international financial architecture very complex, and so it's important that there's a way to aggregate or better coordinate a lot of these institutions and tools. And if we go to the next slide. Yeah. So as early as 2020, the V20 has been calling for a fit-for-climate Bretton Woods system, which evolved through 2021 and 2022 towards a reform of the entire international financial system. The status quo financial architecture doesn't enable but effectively disables development positive climate action. And so starting in 2021 through the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership, the V20 began working on this fit for climate risk financial architecture, which finally evolved in 2022 to what's known today as the Global Shield. So there is an important role here in terms of this being a cooperation initiative between V20 and G7 economies to substantially increase financial protection against the accelerating climate risks through prearranged and trigger-based funds. The prearranged component is really important because it gives predictability as it's arranged ahead of time. And then the trigger base is important so that the funds are deployed based on data and science instead of having to put the burden on the most vulnerable countries to apply and unlock for resources right after disaster strike. And so the Global Shield aims to ultimately build domestic and regional protection systems for sustainable resourcing of financial and social protection packages to the economy, ecosystems, enterprises, and communities. Much of the work around or to date around financial protection has been very small in scale and not necessarily coordinated across programs or financing. In some cases, institutions that we work with today may lack the instruments to deal with loss and damage. And so the Global Shield aims to change this through country packages that includes a portfolio of tools and solutions to reduce the financial protection gap. The Shield also works with the existing financial architecture and a range of partners, including, which I'll share on the next slide, the World Bank, Frankfurt School, and a UN fund. The point here is that these three vehicles would work together in order to facilitate needs-based climate and disaster risk financing and insurance and build the long-term case for adaptation. If we go to the next slide, so far the Global Shield has mobilized around 270 million euros from a range of support listed here on the slide. The Global Shield is really proposing this improved system to make financial protection more systematic, coherent, and sustained. And it's composed, as I mentioned, of three coordinating units or financing vehicles, which would then support the in-country packages. And it works through three financing wallets, as I highlighted the World Bank, and each of these wallets have a specific role. So the World Bank focuses on integrated financial packages, complementing investments, and then the GSSP, hosted in the Frankfurt School, the Solutions Platform, looks at research, capacity building, modeling, data support, and other solutions, including premium financing. The CVF V20's Joint Multi-Donor Fund, hosted in UNOP, supports with its very own community-level loss and damage funding program, premium support, and climate-smart insurance. There is the Sustainable Insurance Facility under this program as well. And we can move to the next slide. So far, there are, sorry, the next slide, yep, thank you. The next slide shows the list of eligible countries for the Global Shield support. So there are 8 countries as Pathfinder countries, and 1 region in the Pacific. The point of this pathfinding, or the Pathfinder countries, is to literally pathfind. So there is a diversity in GDP levels, in size, in region, and climate impacts. And if we go to the next slide, this just shows what happens between countries expressing interest and then the final support package delivery. So this is effectively the Global Shield in-country process. So to start, the country selects a focal point that, together with the Global Shield Secretariat, and if needed, a country support structure, will determine the process, steps, and organize stakeholder consultations in order to stock take existing solutions and figure very quickly the protection gaps in the country. This is also informed by a participatory process. A CDRFI request is then developed and reviewed by technical experts in the Global Shield Technical Advisory Group, and then by the Coordination Hub, a group of experts in a variety of different themes, ranging from risk financing to gender to other items. And so here then the financing vehicles would then be figuring what the support package would look like and then would share it with the country for final approvals. And if we go to the next slide, the Global Shield doesn't just work on financing instruments, it also works on financial and technical support and other forms of support here listed on this slide. And if we go to the next slide, so I would like to also just share an overview of this loss and damage funding program under the V20's fund. The point of this is really just to share, what is loss and damage? What does this actually mean? So there's community infrastructure that gets impacted. So repairing, rebuilding community buildings, water supply, medical facilities, schools, water sanitation facilities, public housing. This is all about repairing and rebuilding. So that would be one element of loss and damage. Another element is around private assets. So housing repairs, temporary housing costs if people have to move, livelihood assets like livestock, and resources like tools and other things that get lost or damaged during a disaster. Another thing that mostly a lot of the island nations are facing is coral reef degradation and sometimes loss of coral reefs. And so here, it's clear that as a result of climate change, this is happening. And so part of their loss and damage needs also requires coral reef restoration. And the point of loss and damage is also not to build back the same, but rather build forward better. And so the adaptation component is equally critical. And so this is why it's always important to have to build resilience through adaptation and also have access to financing in order to deal with losses and damages. If we go to the next slide. This is just an overview of some of the loss and damage financing options. I know that as colleagues here enter the COP and as negotiators enter the COP, there will be some discussions on, where else can we leverage financing? And so this is just an overview of some of the options that the V20 has in discussion. I think many different groups are pursuing different avenues, but thought it would be useful just to have it on the slide and also to share that it's very clear that V20 economies and developing countries will require around 200 to 400 billion to deal with losses and damages. And this is also where adaptation investments are really critical. And I think I can just stop here in the interest of time. Back to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Sara, for this overview and for providing what I think is a good look at what the Global Shield can actually do and how it works in countries. So we want to encourage participants to raise questions if you have some on the Global Shield, on how it works, to put them on the chat or to raise your hand later on in the Q&A, and we'll try to take those up, because I would like to move on to Foster. I know, Foster, you are on a tight schedule right now, just with COP around the corner. And so moving on to you, as a representative of Ghana, which is a member of the V20 and the G77 plus, what does the outcome of this fifth transitional committee mean to you and mean to Ghana?
Yeah, thank you very much for, I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and greetings to all the participants wherever they may be. I would like to start by sharing some devastating effects that climate change-induced losses and damage has had over the period on the V20 groups of countries. That's the 68 economies systematically threatened by climate change. It's very important that we look at what research and the science are telling us. And over the period, our research has shown that the V20 countries have lost about 500 billion over the last 2 decades. That's we're looking at between 2000 and 2019. This has led to further harmful effects on these countries. And so far, the V20 countries would have been 20% wealthier within this period. But as a result of climate change, they've lost so much, and it's projected that they are likely to lose further 200 billion through to 2027. When even though we are going to keep to the 1.5 degrees limit of the Paris Agreement, as was has been anticipated. Between 2009 and 2019, African countries have lost approximately $200 billion, and the continent continue to lose with every severe dry spell, flood, and also slow onset events such as sea rise. Here in Ghana, the World Bank report has also made it clear through the Country Climate and Development Report, the CCDR report. And we believe that if the necessary measures are not put in place, it's going to affect the country more. At least it's anticipated that 1 million people will fall into the poverty line as a result of climate change, and this is going to affect a lot of developmental gains. Again, incomes will be reduced further by about 40%, and household will become much poorer if these things are not taken in place, and it's likely to affect about 40% of household by 2050. Between 2009 and 2019, Ghana has experienced approximately about 15.1 billion economic losses. That is approximately what we are seeking to mobilize from now to 2030. And therefore, it tells us that climate change is very important, and fighting it is very key for us. That is why the Ministry of Finance is not taking chances. As we can see, the losses are so stagnant and threatening our developmental gains. We try as much as possible to, as a country, to put in measures to ensure that we can accelerate on our development. But climate change is threatening that. So we look forward as we continue the discussion, and also look forward to the transition team as they continue to deliberate, even though they've come to some conclusion in terms of location of the loss and damage. We believe that moving into COP28 will give us an opportunity for a further deliberation, and also to ensure that they can deliver adequately and provide the needed concessional resources to address the issues of loss and damage with the necessary sense of urgency. Because I remember the last time we engaged the COP president, the emphasis of urgency and timing is very important. So we look forward to that, and ensuring that we can alleviate issues of loss and damage affecting these 68 vulnerable countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Foster. And if you allow me, and if you still have time for one quick question, I'd like to get your perspective on the Global Shield as well. Ghana has been working intensely with the Global Shield on within the in-country process, and helping Ghana to submit a request for support from the Global Shield financing structure. So what kind of support do you expect, and what benefits do you see coming from the approach of the Global Shield?
Yeah, thank you once again. I believe Ghana has a very unique way of approaching climate change, and I always say that with the kind of technical expertise that we have, even though not to that level that I think at the global level, but the commitment is very important. Ghana's Ministry of Finance, as we are all aware, is leading the chart on the global shield area, working with the Global Risk Modeling Alliance, and also trying to ensure that we can tap into the resources in terms of pre-arrangement and or trigger-based kind of financing in linked to adaptation and all that. It's also very important that as was launched in the COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh, I always say that when you are there at the beginning and you see progress, you appreciate it very most. We've been able to ensure that we achieve some successes, and in doing so, Ghana, we had an in-country process, and that was very fantastic, represented by high-level ministers, the Minister of Finance, Environment, the Ambassador for Germany, Japan, EU was represented, the British High Commission were all represented. It gave the sense of importance to the work that we are doing. In terms of what we have done so far, the Global Shield in-country process, we've had a number of stakeholders engagement. Formally, we've had 2 consultative engagement and some informal engagement, where we've stakeholders such as the ministries and also agencies such as NADMO, meteorological agencies, hydro, and others. And something very unique is the role the private sector is playing, and also academia and the also CSOs are playing in the work that we are doing. It makes it so hard feeling that we managed to come this far. And the country process has revealed that there is the need to look at areas such as agri insurance, and also the need to enhance existing initiatives such as the African Risk Capacity and the IDF moving forward, how we can upskill that, and the need to align and emphasize adaptation project, because even though the Global Shield is looking at trigger-based and also how we can ensure that when these things happen, we can be supported, there's a need to also look at how adaptation can be aligned to it, and also revealing the challenges of implementing climate and disaster risks. And the issue of data has been something that has been haunting us for a while. But I always say this, we complain about this, how can we get this done? I think we've arrived at a point where if the Global Shield can help us have a comprehensive data hub, and also make sure that it's accessible, I think it's going to help. It's very also important that we highlight the need to bringing people together, the participatory approach, which we have done it very good. Once we were doing this thing, anticipating that we can submit this to the Global Shield Secretariat, something very unfortunate happened. That is, in September of this year, there was excess rain that caused Akosombo Dam to overflow. And at a point when the spillage was happening, the technical people were torn between to let the dam go and to spill gradually, even though they knew the intended effect. They had to manage it, and it led to a lot of harm and a lot of people within the downstream much affected and all that. So I think these are some of the things that, and schools, health centers and all those were affected, and it gave us a sense of learning from these and bringing this onto the Global Shield agenda. So I believe it's important that the Global Shield helping us is key, and we'll be able to get there. Having said this, I think as in terms of benefit from the Global Shield, we can never rule out that Global Shield is a complementary to the loss and damage financing. And I believe that it needs to be highlighted very well. For Ghana, this means that we need to finalize and make sure that the Global Shield provide the needed financing within the agriculture area, looking at how multi-hazard impact on most vulnerable people, especially within the cocoa area, can be supported, because cocoa is a very important economic backbone of the economy. And one area that I think very much worrying is the coastal area. Some of us who happened to join the last workshop visited areas within Cape Coast, and knowing the issues of data, realized that if we don't do something in the shortest possible time, our coastal area within Ghana will not be so much attractive for tourists to come and visit, for us to appreciate the castles that we boast so much of, for us to have the people living in the coastal area to live there. I'm not sure we will have 10 years. I'm sure we have, looking at what is happening, because some of us happen to have school around Cape Coast, looking at casting our mind back where the period that we saw the coastal areas very lovely and we could go and relax. I'm not sure we have 10 years to be waiting. So I believe that we should be able to do much to get there. And I believe the V20, in collaboration with the Global Shield, and most especially the Loss and Damage Fund, would support us so that at least we can bring this back, if not to salvage and save it for the next generation, and also to make sure that we can have a lovely earth as we met it. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Foster. I think this is a very honest look back at what the Global Shield has already achieved. You mentioned, the focus on data, working with data, trying to enhance the models so that we can make risk-informed decisions on prearranged finance, but also on other options that we have for adaptation. And you also highlighted the inclusive approach in countries to really bring together the various perspectives to leverage private sector resources. I think that's an important feature as well. And also to hear the voices from civil society and to crowd in the voices of those that are most affected. And this actually brings me to our next speaker, Vositha. I do note, however, before we move to you, Vositha, there is a question in the chat, and I was wondering, Sara, if you'd like to take up that question already, which is whether there is a cap per country in terms of percentage of the fund each year. So, Sara, can you respond to that right now?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel, and thanks, Brian, for the question on the chat. I don't think it makes sense to have a cap per country, just because climate impacts are accelerating, and there's expectation that the Global Shield program increases as well to support country needs. And so what we're putting together instead of a cap is a way to determine, how best we can allocate resources based on what we have today. But it shouldn't, I think, just generally, it makes more sense to rather grow the Global Shield program rather than have these limitations already prescribed. Thanks.
Thank you, Sara, for that. And so with that, let us move to our next speaker today, Vositha. I'm looking at you and whether you can turn on your camera so we can see you as well. And Vositha, hi. You've been strongly involved with the loss and damage process, and you've also been strongly involved with the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership and the development of the Global Shield. So I have a two-part question for you. First of all, how is your perspective on how the funding arrangements for loss and damage can ensure that funding reaches the most vulnerable communities? What are discussions on that front? And secondly, which role do you see for civil society specifically within the Global Shield?
Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to speak and engage in the work that would guide potentially means of implementation for the most vulnerable communities. So looking at the funding arrangements, looking at what Global Shield would represent in line with what's out there, especially the Loss and Damage Fund, I think Global Shield is placed in a unique position as part of the funding arrangements mentioned and referred to in the UNFCCC's decision at COP27, as well as the Transitional Committee's recommendations, to showcase and support in a comprehensive needs-based approach the loss and damage needs, or addressing loss and damage at the forefronts of climate impact. And this also highlights the fact that the funding arrangements need to be coordinated as well as complementary, and not duplicating the efforts in a way that it doesn't necessarily guide the means of implementation, the funding that is needed to the same focus, and not distributed in a way that it's effectively implemented. So I feel Global Shield's benefit would be that it has a close collaboration with the Loss and Damage Fund through the systems that I just mentioned, or the approaches that were mentioned, and also being a centerpiece in the finance architecture, having been introduced at COP27 at a key moment where there was a lot of attention for addressing loss and damage being given, and also building on the progress of the UNFCCC process of the Santiago Network negotiations, as well as loss and damage ones. So building on the key moments that I mentioned, and also other options that are out there, it's important that we look at the same principles and processes that would be in the funding mechanisms that we will be working with Global Shield plus other funding mechanisms, so as to not have contradictions or have procedural issues. So it would be important to look at principles such as common but differentiated responsibilities, looking at the vulnerabilities and allocations of funding based on recognized vulnerabilities, evidence-based approaches, transparency, and good governance. As well as then looking at opportunities and synergies that could enhance what would be the impact that is generated from the activities of Global Shield. And there again, looking at COP28, how Global Shield's role could connect with Loss and Damage Fund, how the technical support provided by Global Shield and its different entities that Sara mentioned, for example, could contribute to the work of the technical support on the UNFCCC process, so that there is a coordinated and collaborated way of acting, because everyone's trying to reach a common objective of addressing the vulnerabilities and the losses and damages. Yes, so I think that would be the first part of it. And some of the things that we could consider would be looking at the transparency aspect of access to information, looking at the inclusion of different actors, which is definitely a focus, but ensuring that this is continued, this is going to be consistently present, and not something that might be lost along the way of progress. And also not having the duplication, and also not having a diversion from the Loss and Damage Fund, so that both could be complementing on how the work on loss and damage could be done, addressing risk could be done, addressing vulnerabilities could be done in a transparent way that would be beneficial to those who are most vulnerable countries and communities. For civil society engagement, I would say there's a big role that the civil society could play. Just to make a note, I'm purely speaking with my civil society hat on and no other hat, so that this is not attributed to what other hats I might wear in the coming days. So, so looking at civil society, what is the role? So I think there's a big contribution that civil society could play, and that includes contributing to connecting different actors, bringing evidence from the ground, ensuring that transparency is maintained, or ensuring that information is distributed, and also looking at country-specific, locality-specific actions could be supported, and also providing technical support. So we have a presence in the coordination hub as well, and how this could be supported to bring evidence and efficiency in the processes related to the Global Shield. And anything else I missed? No, I think I did cover what I wanted to cover. And I would want to highlight as a wrap up to what my intervention is. One, the relationship across the architecture of loss and damage funding, risk management that is existing, the synergies that need to be built, the coordination that needs to be there for efficient and effective action, and also the importance of inclusion, the transparency, the good governance that would help continue the work on the work that's the focus of loss and damage, as well as the Global Shields work that's happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vositha, for this. I think what stuck out to me is the role civil society can play in informing both the global process as well as country processes on locally specific, context specific allocation of funding, on getting the operational modalities of the fund to build on vulnerabilities and to build on data, but also on ensuring the linkages. And you mentioned avoiding duplication and making sure that these different funding arrangements can be complementary. And this brings me to our fourth speaker today, Sebastian. You've been waiting patiently. First of all, thank you for that. So I wanted to ask you, as a representative of the V20, as a representative of the G7, and having supported the Global Shield very strongly from the beginning, how do you see specifically the complementarities between the Global Shield and the Loss and Damage Fund? How can those two work together for maximum impact? And yeah, handing over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. It's indeed a very timely moment to be with all of you, because we're speaking between the last session of the Transitional Committee, which in the end had 5 sessions, not 4, but came up with a good result, and the COP itself, which is coming up quite soon. So this is the moment, I think, to be discussing this. So we came out of TC5, I think, with a good result. We are very happy. We would like for this to pass through COP as it is, and we're quite hopeful that it will. From the perspective of the German government, there's a lot of good substance in the TC discussion. It's been highlighted by previous speakers, so I'm not going to repeat all of it. But there is a focus on the vulnerable. There is a focus also on a good donor basis, I think, on an expanding donor basis. And there is a possibility that starting this up with the World Bank, at least for an interim period, is something that will allow us to get this fund up quickly and get it up running quite quickly. So that's where we are right now. We now need to get this to COP, and that depends on all of us, obviously. We would hate to see this all reopened. We would like to see this go through as it is. If it goes through, and I suppose that it will, I think we have a changed landscape in the field of loss and damage, but in a good way. We have a good basis for our future loss and damage work. The fund is going to be what we make of it. The discussion of the fund is not going to stop at COP. It's only going to begin at COP, right? If all goes well, we'll have a board set up. We'll have people discussing the hows and ifs and buts of the fund, how it's going to be working. This is going to be set up quite quickly. And I think it's important for us, from the Global Shield perspective, to bring to the table what we have. The Global Shield has been a trailblazer. It's been mentioned of this, has started a whole discussion around COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, in parallel with the decision that funding arrangements, including a fund, were to come up. And the Global Shield has since provided a lot of good substance in what we've been doing to look at how can we actually improve resilience? How can we set up in-country processes? Yes, they're long. Yes, they're difficult, but they're necessary in order to come to a good result that benefits the vulnerable, that benefits resilience of the population. How can we manage and layer risk in all of this? All these discussions that we've been having within the Global Shield are of vital importance to be transported into that loss and damage discussion, so that we can make good use of the money that will come out of a fund at some point, and I hope rather sooner than later. So my plea here would be to everybody who will be at COP and who will play in that game. Let's make sure that this passes COP as it has passed the TC. Let's make sure that we can put up a lot of substance. And then I come to all of the things that Vositha and Foster have mentioned very rightly. I mean, I can subscribe to almost everything that has been said there. We need to make sure that the Global Shield keeps the role that it has as an established, let's say, trailblazer. That's what it has been called in the field, setting quality standards, setting standards of work, showing how it can be done, how it can be done in a non-politicized manner, how it can be done with a very strong focus on the vulnerable and on the in-country processes, on the actual needs of the vulnerable, and then working in complementarity to the setup of the fund. How exactly that's going to look like, that's going to be a very interesting question. And that's why I've been listening very diligently to the different views and opinions coming up here. It has to be complementary. I agree fully. It can't duplicate. I agree fully. But we have to navigate in there somehow. Will the Global Shield be ultimately a recipient of funds from the Big Loss and Damage Fund? Will it work alongside the Big Loss and Damage Fund with additional funding as a funding arrangement? And how will we make sure that the two will be complementary to each other? Those are the tasks that are on our agenda now. Those are the things that we must look out for jointly. And I'm very happy for this partnership with the V20, because we know what we're talking about, right? We have been starting the Global Shield from the very beginning. So let's continue in this spirit. Let's continue bringing this substance into the international discussion to have the best loss and damage landscape that we can have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Also for keeping it brief, because we also want to engage the audience, and we still have 10 minutes for that, which is great. But I think, you know, just to come back to what you said, the learnings that the Global Shield can already feed in to the loss and damage process, the in-country approach, really being inclusive, looking at data, because if you look at data and if you look at how to layer risks, you can also ensure that the support that comes through the Global Shield and the finance that is pre-arranged through the Global Shield is then complementary to the funding that comes from the Loss and Damage Fund. And I think just bringing in these processes and also using the findings of the Global Shield in-country process for the allocation of the Loss and Damage Fund will be an important thing in the future. And also Ghana's process, looking at Foster again, and the Ministry of Finance's leadership in Ghana in managing that process can really serve as a best practice here. So with that, and thanking again all speakers for your great contributions, I'm now looking at both the chat as well as any people raising their hands for any comments or questions you may have to the speakers. Feel free to address your questions directly to any of them, or to address your questions generally. And so looking at the chat, I think, Brian, you raised a question again. Are the US, EU, China, India all on board the outcomes of Transitional Committee 5? With them, it probably passes. Without, it may not. So I'm looking perhaps at either Sebastian, well, maybe at all participants or at all speakers, whether any of you can come in on the political constellation around the US, EU, China, and India, and the outcomes of the Transitional Committee. Sebastian, is that a question you may be able to tackle?
Look, I can try. Anything can happen in those COPs. We all know that. The Transitional Committee in TC5 has agreed on an outcome, and I think a very good one, as I've been saying. So I think everybody should be on board. Let me phrase it that way. Now we need to really, this is the ball is right in front of the goal. Now we need to score the goal. That's what COP needs to do. But I think we run a really good chance of this working out. And I know that our Emirati hosts are also working very, very diligently and ambitiously to get this done. I'm quite positive that we will have a positive result here. But in the end, it's up to everybody. Not all the countries were represented in the TC. In the end, everybody needs to agree. But as I said, let's be hopeful about this and let's do our best, because the decision we have out of the TC, I think, is the best one we can get. If that were reopened, I don't think we would get a good decision, a decision as good as that again. So let's make sure we stick with what we have. This is a really good basis to work from.
Thank you, Sebastian, and yeah, I agree. I think we need to build on the work the Transitional Committee has already done, and some of the tricky issues that it has already managed to address, and hopefully the COP negotiations can build on that as opposed to reopening certain issues. So looking at the chat and also at the group of attendees, are there any questions, comments, ideas, suggestions that you would like to share? Foster, you've raised your hand again, so please come in.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I've made the case, but it's also very important. Emphasis is also good. Looking at the interest and also the how Ghana has been able to exhibit and gotten ourselves together in a record time of 6 months. I'm sure the remaining vulnerable countries will be coming in that manner to also put a request before the Global Shield. So what, as stakeholders are gathered today, what I want to request is that, and also since Sebastian is also here on the line, I would want to request that the Global Shield is resourced beyond what has been provided. The pledges that have been made, we welcome it, but we also would request that more is added as we head towards COP28, and so that at least the most affected, most vulnerable people and countries can benefit and salvage themselves from the difficulties of climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Foster, for that. Again, emphasizing the need to grow the pot, and I think the best way to do that is actually to pinpoint to the good results that we have achieved. You mentioned the record time in which Ghana managed to analyze its protection gaps and eventually submit a request for support to the Global Shield. And I think looking at those examples and looking at or illustrating these examples both to donor countries as well as to other developing vulnerable countries is a good way to create further momentum and grow both the supply as well as the demand side. So there are 2 additional questions in the chat. The first one from Shakira is, given that disaster financing or prearranged financing has traditionally focused on extreme events, what is the Global Shield doing to learn how to address loss and damage from slow onset processes and non-economic loss and damages? So, very good question. I'm looking at perhaps Sara, whether you would like to come in here, or Sebastian as well, from the V20 or G7 perspective. Is there a perspective on that? Sara or Sebastian? Otherwise, I can try to take a stab at this one.
Hey, Daniel, sorry, I think I missed the question.
Yeah, no worries. So the question is, given that prearranged finance has traditionally focused on extreme events, what is the Global Shield doing to learn how to address loss and damage from slow onsets and non-economic loss and damage?
I think the in-country processes illustrate where slow onset impacts are there in countries. And in terms of how the Global Shield can deal with it, there are two things. One is either having data analytics or a product developed, or really building the case for adaptation. So there are, I think, many ways where the Global Shield can support dealing with slow onset.
Thank you, Sara. So also emphasizing the investments in data and how the Global Shield can also enhance the data landscape in countries through the in-country process, and hopefully that can inform further investments, also addressing slow onset events. So there's two more questions, but we are also reaching the end of the webinar. So I'll try to cover both. Let's see. So in addition to the in-country approach, are there considerations of the regional politics relationships? So are there regional processes in the Global Shield, and how are regional politics or regional initiatives being taken into account? And yes, Sara, thanks. Please come in.
Yeah, I think very quickly, just because we have a region within the Global Shield, the Pacific, that is one example of a regional process coming through. And I think what's interesting about that is, one, it builds scale. It also is, I guess, a reflective of climate impacts, where it won't just affect one country at a single time. It could affect multiple countries. And this also brings forward then the role of the risk pools. We have the Africa Risk Capacity, CCRIF in the Caribbean, and then PCRIC in the Pacific. These are all risk carriers and will play very soon, I think, a very important role, and already are playing a very important role in transferring risk. And so I think moving forward, taking a regional lens into account, the risk expansion of the role of risk pools, and also countries being able to afford let's say a good amount, or a decent amount of risk of coverage by the risk pools, is also something that's currently lacking. And so I think the Global Shield can support with supporting countries getting the adequate coverage from the risk pool, because right now all the countries are under their optimum coverage with the risk pools they have access to today.
Thank you, Sara. So clear focus also under the Global Shield to strengthen regional risk pools and the international landscape of development insurers. So we have reached the end of the webinar. We'll try to answer the last question in the chat for the interest of time, and seeing it's Friday and we're all approaching the weekend. I would like to thank all of you for your attention, for your active listening, for your questions, and of course, first and foremost, thanks to all the speakers, Foster, Sara, Vositha, and Sebastian, for your contributions. Thanks from the Global Shield Secretariat, and bye-bye.